So when we import the OMF, we're going to break up the tracks by character. We're going to tie it to a bus track. We're going to use room tone. We're going to use ambience and create other sound effects if we need it. We're going to edit music, and then we're going to export it. First thing we want to do is take our final picture lock and create a thumbnail. I find it's easiest to just open it into QuickTime and export as 480p, and I'm going to put it in my Audition folder. And when we open it, we see that it is a thumbnail. In fact, I want to rename it thumbnail. And if we look at the contents of that, we see that it is 35 megabytes, while our final color correction is 1.34 gigabytes. So the whole idea is to create a reference video that won't use up all the Audition system resources, so we can spend that all on rendering audio. The next thing we want to do is open Audition and import that OMF file. And we'll go to our Audition folder and create a subfolder called Files that will store all of those audio files that we've used, but keep things nice and neat. So if we look at our Audition folder here in Files, we see that all the audio files that we've used will be stored in here. Otherwise, it'll just put it in this folder, and it'll be ugly and messy. And I'm too German for that to happen. Okay, so quickly, we just want to save this where we want it to be. Eliminate the OMF part, and I want it to go to this folder, and that's where it's going to save the Audition file. And before we dig into any of this, let's import our thumbnail. So I'm just going to go to where we stored it. Here it is. And I'm just going to drag it right up here to this top track. Basically, it's going to, the audio that is on that thumbnail is right here. So I'm just going to highlight it and delete it. The stuff that was underneath it was not overwritten. And then we'll just scrub down a little bit just to see that we've got our thumbnail working. Now, as we look at this project, we see that it's taken the stereo tracks and turned them into mono tracks. And so a lot of these are just duplicates of the same thing. So there's some tracks that we can just delete because we don't need the duplicate room tone. We've got our music here. It's split into stereo channels. So we could go all the way left with this bad boy, all the way right with that one. And that'll restore stereo to our stereo pairs. If you just choose one and make it mono, it's not the worst sin in the world. I like to organize my tracks by color so I can get a better sense of what they are. So I just try to make all my music tracks one color. It doesn't matter which one it is. And now I'm just going to shrink these guys up. Keep them out of our way. So one cool thing is that if you put two fingers on your touchpad, we can scroll up and down here, and this will also make your width size different. I want to turn off the music so it doesn't interfere with our sound editing. Alright, doesn't really sound like there's any significant media content there, so I'm just going to delete those two tracks. First we've got our dude, and we'll call him Guy. And so we need to separate these tracks by talent. I'm going to drag that there. If we hold the shift when we lift things up, it won't move left or right. Oh. So it appears that that's her, so I'm just going to pull that down. So now we've separated our dialogue by the two characters and the room tone. And before we start getting into normalizing the audio, I want to get into the mixer panel, and I want to go to special, and I want to add our mastering filter. And we're going to start with one called subtle clarity. Basically we'll want to move this around towards the end of the mix. But we want to make sure that there's some presets in this that we want to turn off. We want to turn off the reverb. We want to turn off the exciter because that stuff is more musical for us. And it's already created the loudness to 15%, so we can just keep that. The next thing I want to do is add some compression, and we're going to use the hard limiter. And we're going to set it at, we're going to pick the default of -3. And so basically we're going to leave these on so there won't be any surprises when we get into the final mix. So once you get your tracks separated, then you want to equalize the volume of everything. And it's really as easy as digging in here and making the shapes look about the same and listening to them as they play. And because it's a particularly noisy track, in places where they don't speak, like right here, I would then lower the volume of the ambient space and crossfade to it. And so basically I've gone through the whole thing trying to get the shapes to be about the same size. This might be a little big. Let's listen to it. You can squeeze that down a little bit. And so then once we're done with that, then we want to tie it to a Vox track. So I'm going to just delete this track. And I'm going to go to track, add stereo bus track. We'll call that Vox. And then I'm going to make these guys bigger. And so instead of sending it to the master channel, we want to send it to the Vox bus track right here. And the reason why we want to do that is that then that gives us the power to find that perfect volume level and have the ability to change that. If you need to automate that, we can click down here, and here at volume this allows us to bring things up and down without having to use the faders. So once we've got the voice and the room tone set, now it's time to start playing with sound effects. I'm going to make our lives easier, and we're going to start with an ambient track of a coffee shop just to kind of create the space. And there's some sections in the dialogue where I wanted it to be more clear, so I put in some keyframes there. The cafe and the room tone are serving as our background to help mask the gaps in between the dialogue. Now let's watch our guy enter the space. So we can't hear his footsteps, so it feels kind of weird. I'm not really connected to him. And now I'm going to click on the footsteps. Now suddenly he's a real person. So in this story we could say perhaps he got cancer, and so we could take away those footsteps and make him feel more like a ghost in terms of the sound design. The next thing I did was add the door. And there's a bell on the door at the beginning, but because it's a sad ending, I use that same door, but I cut out the bell. So then once we get done with the diegetic sound effects, Now we can get into the non-diegetic ones.
What? It's official. I got the news.
Little pending doom.
Yeah, I know.
And then I let it grow.
Well, I wanted you to be one of the first to know.
And so right there when she grabs his hands, I want there to be a chance for hope. So I added a little non-diegetic element there.
I got the news.
And then once all that's done, then we can bring in our music and get our final mix. Alright, so that's the basic idea of sound design that we'll be practicing for the rest of the semester.